This is a chapter-by-chapter introduction to my book titled The Early Karl Barth, Historical Context and Intellectual Formation, 1905 to 1935, published in 2018 with Moissebeck. In the introduction to the book, I provide a general introduction to the history of the historization of Barth, introducing the different schools of interpretation and positioning the question in the context of its contemporary discussion. I also present a biographical overview of Barth's background, before then turning to the issue of society, politics, and culture around 1900. In this second part of the introduction, I address the old bourgeoisie and the new socialists, radical youth, World War I, anti-liberalism, and radical socialisms, a variety of different issues that make up some of the background to Barth's historical context. I then address theology and religious socialism around 1900, the dynamics of the different schools of Protestant theology leading up to the situation at the outbreak of World War I, and the group of religious socialists especially, presenting their background and some of their ideas and program essentially. Finally, I address the situation of post-World War I Protestantism, Weimar Protestantism, and the Barth-Gogarten group as it began to develop. In Chapter 1, which is titled Socialism, Marburg, and World War I, 1905 to 1919, Barth's drift into anti-liberal socialist radicalism is presented, while the development and continuity of his socio-political and cultural analysis is examined. Other themes are also introduced, such as Barth's adoption of Wilhelm Hermann's trans-historical subjectivist theology, the emergence of Barth's dialectical theology, Barth's early conceptions of an organic state, his account of the love of the fatherland, his idea of the political sense of community, his reaction to World War I, his break from the pro-democratic Ragas wing of religious socialism, and finally his first public conflict with the modern liberal German Protestantism. In Chapter 2, which is titled Romans, Overbeck, Harnack, and Ethics, 1919 to 1931, Barth's Romans 1919 and Romans 1922 are presented in their socio-political and cultural contexts with the aid of the history of their reception. Franz Overbeck's influence on Barth is briefly addressed, as well as Barth's general anti-Americanism and opposition to the League of Nations. The significance of the Tambach Address and a few correspondences from this period with Paul Altus, Alfred Daniel, Adolf von Harnack, and Wilhelm Stapel are analyzed in the presentation of Barth's public persona in the 1920s. Barth's initial rejection of the German majority social democracy shortly after the formation of the Weimar Republic, and his initial reactions to the new nationalism in Germany are presented. Specific themes from Barth's ethics lectures in the late 1920s and early 1930s are summarized, including authoritarianism, folkish thinking, state-community ideas, and Barth's defense of Mussolini and the orders of creation. In Chapter 3, which is titled The Dane Case, 1931 to 1932, Barth's relationship to his historical context in 1931 and 1932, and his basic posture towards the rise of National Socialism, which was an avoidance of conflict, are analyzed, drawing upon Barth's response to the Dane case and other sources from this time. The Dane case, as it would later be called, was a kind of prehistory of what was to come in the 1930s and 1940s with radical German nationalism. In Chapter 4, which is titled National Socialism and Theological Existence Today, 1932 to 1935, Barth's attempt to establish a modus vivendi, a way of living together, with the new nationalist state will be presented in relative continuity with his response to the Dane case. Barth's call for pastors, theologians, and churchmen not to address the situation after Hitler's rise to power, but to focus rather on the Word of God, will be analyzed as an example of the use of his substantial influence in the churches in Germany at this time. His later suspension in Bonn, conflict with the leadership of the confessing church, and his subsequent return to Switzerland are introduced as the immediate prehistory of Barth's first public opposition to the National Socialist state in 1935. In Chapter 5, which is titled Socio-Political and Cultural Issues, a handful of themes are presented which span across the period of inquiry. The following topics are analyzed. First, Barth, dialectical theology and National Socialism. Second, Barth and the Jews. And finally, third, Barth, expressionism, new objectivity, anti- or transhistoricism, authoritarianism, and alterity. In the conclusion, which is titled Historiographical Debates and Responses, some of the questions are addressed that have been discussed in the secondary literature on Barth. These are related to socio-political, cultural, and historical issues in his early period. Here the following questions are addressed. Is Barth best understood through the theological lens alone? Was Barth in continuity or discontinuity with 19th century modern liberal theology? Was Barth apolitical in the Weimar Republic? And finally, did Barth contribute to the toxic forces that led to the downfall of the Weimar Republic?